Okay, so printing. I need to know where you guys are at when it comes to printing. So, when you get through foundations 1 and 2, are you actually printing? Do you print in in those classes? Okay, but you do print some printing, right?
Yeah.
So has anybody in this class not printed in this room, the Inkjet Lab print room? Has everybody been in there at least? Okay, so what I'm going to do is, that being said, everybody in this room knows that there's a matte black ink and a photo black ink, and you need to change the ink, the black ink, to match whatever paper type you're on. Does anybody not know that? Okay. So first off, everybody come over here really quick to look at this printer. I'm only going to do this on the Epsons. You can do your work on, there's some Canons in there as well. By and large, they work very, very, very similar to one another. I'm going to show you very few of the mechanics about this printer. We're going to talk a lot about the software because that's where people usually get screwed up. So when you first start to actually work at this printer, the first thing you really need to do is a nozzle check on this printer, which we will get to in just a second. It's basically just to make sure that the nozzles on this thing are all clean, because if they're not, you will not get true reproducible color. There's a slider on this, so when the printer comes, this thing is closed up like that. So this guy's also closed up like this. This you simply pop like that and it'll open up. If you're doing a larger paper, there's a slide out tray for this, so that it'll catch your larger paper, and it actually goes out even longer if you're doing like 13 by, or this will handle up to 17 by 20. Yeah, so when you're doing the bigger boy stuff, that's where you want to go with this guy. But I'm gonna, I'll probably leave that much of it out. Then this back pops open. This is where you actually load paper in. There's a slide that goes across this to actually let you resize this depending on the paper type that you're going to use. The trick to it is, don't do that. That's wrong. You just want it to come over and just lightly touch this guy. As a matter of fact, in a lot of Epson printers, what will happen is people will bring this thing completely up flush, and the very first thing that happens in the printer itself does, it'll actually kick that open slightly. It's not meant to be a real guide for your paper as much as it's meant to just help out the whole rest of it. If you've got bigger paper as well, this thing comes up like this so that it'll support your bigger paper. A lot of people will do multiple sheets in this. I've never had any luck doing multiple sheets in this. What ends up happening is it'll grab more than one sheet and try to take it through. Sometimes it'll grab them perfectly at the same time, which means you can use the one that's in the back. But a lot of times it'll drag the first one down like a ½ an inch, and then it'll grab the second one and drag that in, and then it ends up printing a ½ an inch on the one piece of paper and the rest of your image on another. It's just a nightmare. Right? I should be able to do something about that. Not set it up here would be the thing to do about it. So at any rate, the thing that I did want to show you is I need everybody to come around here to the front of this. So if you, especially if you don't know, so just so you can sort of like see, so you guys scooch over, crowd in the back, come down here on the bottom, whatever. This is the on switch right here. This is the home button right here, and the home button right here gives you the home screen right here. And there's a couple of things on here. There are PDFs that are on our Canvas site that will tell you everything about this printer, but there's also abbreviated ones that will just work you through the basic steps of how to print on this guy, so it's not like you have to read the whole manual. Both of those are on our Canvas site, both for this week, for session number 3, okay? The thing I was talking to you about is this ink thing, and it's this guy right here. You can see right on here that there is a PK here. The K stands, it's the K from CMYK. It is the black ink. The P stands for photo. The other one is M, stands for matte. You have to match the ink to the paper type that you're using. So if you're using a glossy paper, that is a photo black ink. The PK, that's what you would be using for glossy. If you're using a matte paper, that actually calls for an MK. And I don't know what luster. Did anybody get any luster paper by any chance? Did anybody? It'll be on the back of your luster whether you're supposed to be using a matte ink, because luster is right in between the two.
It's photo.
Is it photo black ink? I thought it was. So they're considering that more of a semi-gloss paper. So again, the photo is a gloss ink. It's a black ink, a black gloss ink, and all of that part matters. To change the two, if you've got the wrong one, so this is set up to be PK right now, which is again would be glossy. You click on this thing that looks like it's supposed to be 2 ink drops. If you click on this, it's 2 ink drops with arrows that point across from one another. I just did this. And you'll see where it can say right now it's on PK, and you can change it to MK. And then you have a proceed right here. I'm not going to do that because I want this thing set up to be glossy. So I'm simply going to hit that guy back. You can also do roll paper on this guy, and there's ways to set this up and rig it. There's also readouts in here in terms of how much ink you've got left, blah, 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 blah. There's also other tools in here to clean stuff. We'll take a look at the software versions of this. If you run into problems with this, the best thing to do is go tap the people that are in there if you don't know what you're doing. Make sense? Okay, so then everybody go back there. We're going to look at setting this up, everything about setting this guy up, although I'm going to show you something else quickly first. So again, remember, if you go to our class right here, our Canvas site, and you go to session 3, and under session 3, you go to session 3 resources, and under session 3 resources, it's right down here. This is an Epson P800. That's what all the Epsons out there are. The Canon, there are Canons out there as well. This is the printing guide for the Canons. These are the guides. If you simply click on these, this has been stuff that was put together by the Digital Lab, and they will walk you through this step by step. So you don't really need to go find anybody in the Digital Lab. This is exactly everything that you would want to know about this and how it is ultimately set up. So that's for the Canon. The same thing exists for the Epson right here. This is both of those guides combined. So again, if you're saving PDFs, that's just what's going on here. This is the Photoshop tool palette. We got through about half of that tonight. We'll get through the rest of it next week. The layer palette, we talked about that. It's layout. That's what this is all about. Curves, we talked about what those are all about. I am going to show you a dodge and burn soft light layer. I'm going to do that before we start this stuff. And then here's the manual for this printer as well. We good on that part? Okay. Before we get into actually printing on this thing or looking at the setup on this, there's a couple of other things that we need to do in Photoshop. So we're going to go back into Photoshop. If you have any layers on top of this, I want you to get rid of these layers. I want you to throw them away, except for the bottom one. This is our image. So I'm going to show you one last layer that's important to actually work with, and it will be a dodge and burn layer. Now, we did extreme dodging and burning last week, and we did it by reprocessing multiple smart objects. Remember? We processed the sky much darker than we did the castle. When the castle was different than yeah, you guys remember all that, right? We did do that in this class, right? Yeah. Doesn't that seem like a year ago? Yeah. Yeah, I know. So what I'm going to show you right now is really something that is designed for much, much more subtle work. If you need to do really heavy work, you need to think about doing the reprocessing that's called parametric color correction or tonal correction. But if you need to do just very subtle stuff, that's what we're going to do like right now. As a matter of fact, let's do this, because aren't you guys tired of working with this castle file? Yeah. Yeah, me too. All right, get rid of this guy. Hopefully you'll be able to get the next file off. If you go back to our server, and on our server, there should be still a raw file on there, this sensor profile working file, CR2 file. Do you guys see that? Can you drag that to your desktop? This is the address right here. This one. You can't get to it again? Okay. So it's the one called sensor profile working file, CR2. Can you copy that to your desktop? You got it, Max? And then if you, Max, if you go back to it, if you hit this plus right here. Oh, that's where, oh, got it. I thought you needed the actual guy. Okay, so the sensor guy, hopefully if you just double click on that, it should launch into Camera Raw. Once into Camera Raw, again, this should be set up now to say open object. If it said open image, you want to hold down the shift key to change that so it says open object, and you simply want to click on this guy to open it up.
How do you get panels to be like locked to the thing again?
Go up to the window, down to workspace, and find your retouching workspace. It says what?
It says retouching.
Then you also, second step, up to workspace, down to reset, and it should say reset retouching at the bottom.
Yeah,
okay, and then finally,
oh, okay.
finally, double click on the name Adobe. You good? Okay. Okay, so, dodging and burning. Okay, so we're going to come in. I'm going to zoom in on this girl's face. And I'm going to say I want to do a small light, just a small light amount of dodging and burning on this guy. So to do this, the way that I'm going to suggest you do this is that you come in, we're going to do another layer on here, but this is a completely different kind of layer. So it's going to be just a regular blank layer on this. So if you click on this regular blank layer, so again, it's the dog-eared icon that's right next to the garbage can. We need to do several things with this layer. The first thing that we need to do with this is fill this with 50% gray. So to do that, come up to the Edit menu, come down to Fill. Dialog box will open up. In the drop down of this fill, you want to click on 50% gray, leave it at a normal blending mode and an opacity of 100% and say OK. And it should give you a gray image that looks like this.
So, sorry. When you did the new layer, how do you get to the...
I'm going to do it right now. So, nothing on here. Click on New Layer. It just puts an empty one on there. It's transparent, so you don't see anything. You don't notice any change. But the layer is highlighted. Then up to the Edit menu, down to Fill. When Fill opens up, in your drop-down menu for contents, pick 50% gray. Leave the blending mode at normal, 100% opacity, and click OK. And you should end up with a gray image. So has everybody got a gray image, right? Okay. So guys, the training wheels are coming off tonight in a big way. You guys got through smart objects, and the hardest part about smart objects, and the more you keep working with it, the better off that will be. But we're now going to take a leap into the real underbelly of math in terms of Photoshop. I'm not going to throw a lot of math at you. I'm simply going to try to describe what's happening here. So there are things in Photoshop called, and none of this exists in Lightroom. There are things in Photoshop called blending modes. And what they are mathematical relationships between layers. So don't let that, how many people in this room would say they are math phobic? Wow, that's not too bad, because usually every hand goes up. Everybody in art school is math phobic. It's okay. This isn't, I'm not going to be testing you on any of this stuff, whatever. It's just to understand what's going on. So what happens here is what blending modes will do is they will allow you to combine values of multiple layers together. So let's say, for instance, if you hover over this guy with your cursor, just bring your cursor anywhere into this field, you will see that in your readout over here, under your info palette, your RGB readout, you're getting this 128, 128, 128. It's middle gray, which is exactly what it should be. That's what we filled it with. Remember, our scale of grays goes from 0 to 255. 128 is in the middle. Does that make sense? So that's why we're getting this readout. However, if you turn the eyeball off and you hover over this girl's nose, I'm going to hover over the highlight of this girl's nose, I get another readout right here. And this readout says 237, 214, 208 here. If I did a blending mode of add, it would add those two numbers together. It would add 128 to all of these numbers, and the result would be something that's beyond 255, and my image would basically be white. Does that sort of make sense? So blending modes are these mathematical relationships. There's a lot of blending modes. I'm not going to get into tons of them. I'm only going to get into one of them tonight. But the one tonight is important to us because of what it allows us to do. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. So you'll see what it is, and then hopefully you'll understand. So I'm going to turn on that layer again, its eyeball. I am going to make sure it's active. To get to the blending modes, it's this thing that says normal right here. This is actually the blending mode for this layer right now. So if you click on that drop-down menu, you get another drop-down menu that goes to dissolve, darken, multiply, blah, 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 through a whole bunch of them down here into lighten screen. And you can see what some of these things do. So for instance, click on darken and you'll see that it actually makes some of the image darker, some of the image lighter. If you click on multiply, it makes everything darker. If you click on color burn, it does this really weird thing to it. Again, what's happening is that it's taking the numerical value of this layer and it's doing some mathematical operation on the one underneath it, and this is the result that you get. Does that make sense? Okay, but the only one that we really care about tonight is this one that is soft light. And if you come all the way down to soft light and let go, you see that it now doesn't look like you're having any impact on your image at all. And that's the exact way that it should be. In soft light, 50% gray has no effect on your image at all. However, if you hit the D key to make sure that your foreground and background colors are at their default, black and white, hit the B key to get a brush, and with a brush, I'm going to, again, check up here to make sure it's 100% opacity. I'm going to actually paint a black stroke on this image. You can see right here in the image, the little icon, you can see where it's been black. And you can also see that the image where it is black has been made darker. What do you call darkening in photography? Anybody in this room ever do any work in the darkroom? Yeah, so this is burning, isn't it? This is burning the image in, right? Hit the X key to get white as your foreground color and do the opposite. This is making my image lighter. What's that called in the darkroom? This is a dodge and burn layer. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay, but when I look at this, I think, well, okay, the dodging and burning, that part looks pretty good, but Jesus, this is awfully heavy-handed here, don't you think? And I would say, yes, this is awfully heavy-handed. This is not the extreme that I want in this. So I'm going to go back 2 steps in history. I'm not going to do it in my history palette. I'm going to use my keys to do it. I'm going to hold down the Command and the Option key and hit Z once, and then hit Z again, and it gets rid of both of those guys. But now what I'm going to do is show you guys how to set up a brush to actually do good dodging and burning. So to do good dodging and burning, this is the way we set things up. You're going to click on your drop down of your brush menu up here at the top, and you need to change the hardness of this brush to be completely soft. As a matter of fact, we need to look at something really quick. I need everybody to hit Command N to bring up just a blank dialog box. And in my case, I'm going to change this to inches, and I'm going to do an 8 by 10. Do you guys have this dialog box, or do you have the other one? You have the other one. So hang on. Just hit cancel out of that box because we'll never get there if you use that box. Go up to hit cancel out of there, come up to the Photoshop menu, down to preferences, down to workspace, I'm sorry, not workspace, do general. And in the general that comes up, click on this thing that says use legacy new document interface. That way Adobe won't keep selling you shit. And say okay. Now hit Command N or just come up to the file menu and do new. And it'll open up a normal dialog box that you can actually use. Change the width drop-down menu to inches if it isn't inches, and then type in 8. Hit the tab key and it'll go to height 10. I'm leaving white as my background color. I'm changing my color profile from sRGB to Adobe RGB, and say okay. If you want this image to be bigger, and I do, double click on the hand. It'll go as large as it can go and still show you the entire image. Then we are going to hit the B key again to get to the brush. So with the B key, we're going to actually work on this guy. However, painting white on white, you won't see a thing. So instead, we're going to hit the X key so that black is now my foreground color. Then I'm going to go back to this drop-down menu, and I'm going to make sure that my hardness is set at 0, and my brush is about a 90 or 100. Somewhere right in there, I'll give you a decent-sized brush. To get rid of the flyout menu, click on the name that says Adobe, and then come over here to the top and click and drag across. And you can see what they mean by a soft brush. It's got a very solid center, but as you get to the edges, the brush softens. It fades out to nothing. If you click on that drop-down menu again and go and click right here in the middle of hardness and get to a 50% hardness, and then click on Adobe to get rid of that, and click and do another line, you'll see that that brush is nowhere near as soft. It's the same size brush, but it's nowhere near as soft. It's got a little bit of a soft edge, but nothing like our very first one. If you click on that drop-down menu again and go to 100% hardness, click on Adobe name again to get rid of the flat menu, click and drag out another one, and you see that you get a perfectly hard brush. So that's the scale you get to work with. And you can use anything in between. You can use 33%, you can use 72%, you can use the entire range from 0, which is completely soft, to 100, which is completely hard. Anything in that range, whatever, you can use. Everybody good with this one? Okay, we're going to hit Command Option Z to get rid of those three guys. I'm going to leave this as a completely hard brush right now just to look at the next two things. The next thing that we're going to pick is opacity. Your opacity right now should be at 100%. You can drop that down. There's three ways to do it. The first way is you can actually click on the value that's in the center there and put in another value. So I'm going to put in 50% and hit the Enter key once, and that will now give me a brush that has 50% opacity. The other way you can do that is you can click on this drop-down menu, and there's a slider in here that you can use to slide and change the value so that you can also get to 50%. Click again on the name Adobe to get that flyout to go away. Finally, you can use the scrubby slider. Again, if you put your cursor right over the name that says opacity, you will then also get the double-headed arrow that will allow you to drag up to raise your opacity or drag down to lower it. However you want to get there, do me a favor and get to 50% opacity. And then I need everybody to look up at this screen really quick before you do this. I'm going to click and drag across, and you'll see that instead of getting a pure black, what I'm really getting in here is 50% gray, because I'm doing black ink, but I'm only painting 50% of it. So that gives me a middle gray. I have not let go of my mouse yet. I'm going to go back across this, and you'll see that as you go back and forth across this, that it does not add any additional opacity to this as long as I have kept my mouse button down the entire time. Does that make sense? However, now I'm going to let go of my mouse button, and then I'm going to press it down again and do the same thing. And now you can see that this is how you start to build up density. However, this is not a pure black. I am doing 50%. So my first 50% laydown gave me a middle gray, halfway between 0 and 50%. I mean 0 and 100%. But now what I'm doing is I'm getting another 50% increment that's halfway between middle gray and black. So now this is going to be around 25%. Does that make sense? And each time you let go and start to add, you start to build density. So I need you guys to practice this really quick. I need you to come back and forth and see that as long as that mouse is down, you don't build density. But the minute you let go and start working on another area, it will actually start to build density. And then finally, you can get even more density. So it's a way to slowly build up density. But you have to be constantly doing mouse down, mouse up, mouse down, mouse up. Does that make sense? Are there questions about opacity? Guys, this becomes the central issue of how every retoucher in the whole wide world works. So these two things I'm going to show you right now. And one of them is opacity. Are we good on this? Okay. To get rid of this really quickly, simply come up to the Edit menu, down to Fill, and in the drop-down menu, pick White, and say OK. It's just a quick way to erase all that shit. So I'm going to drag the opacity all the way back up again, and now we're going to look at flow. I want you to take flow, and I want you to drag it down till about a 20% flow. So what opacity does is it actually lays down a specific amount of ink. And as long as you do not let go of your mouse, it doesn't ever add any more of that. What flow does is it's more like an airbrush or more like a can of spray paint. What flow does is it will allow that density to build over time without you having to lift your mouse up and change it down. So to see how flow works, simply start doing that same move again. Start dragging back and forth, and you'll see that it builds density up without you ever having to lift a mouse. Most people work with flow dropped way down. People will take it down into around the 10 range, the 9 range. You'll see as you start to do things like this, this allows you to then build up different areas of density without ever lifting your mouse off of it. Does that make sense? The other thing that you should know about this, again, is if you hit your X key, you go to white, you can undo what's happening here. You can lighten stuff up by painting white back over these dark areas. Does that make sense? All right, are there questions about flow and opacity? Are we good on this? All right, so close out of this guy. You do not need to save that. Back to the image of the girl. I want to bring down the highlight that's on this girl's nose. So my brush right now is too big. I'm going to make my brush smaller by using the bracket key just to the right of the P key. You need to make sure that your brushes, when you're doing all of this work, are completely soft. You would never use a hard brush to do this. So drag the hardness till it's all the way down. Click on the name Adobe to get rid of that. I am going to leave the opacity at 100%, but I'm going to drop my flow down to like an 8%. And I'm going to then click on this dodge and burn layer. As a matter of fact, I'm going to click on that name that says layer 1, and I'm going to rename that dodge and burn. And say okay to that. And then again, I want to burn this down. Do I want to be painting with white or black on this? Black. I want to be making it darker. So because black is my background color, hit the X key, it makes it my foreground color, and I can start coming in here to start to burn this thing in. And you can see how quickly that takes off. In my case, I would argue that this 8% flow is too strong. Command Z to undo that. I'm going to drop my flow down even more. I'll get down to like a 2% so that I can really start to control this to bring it in. And yes, does it take time? And yeah, and I look at this and people go, well, you didn't do anything to the image. But look what happens when I turn this on and off. Yes, I did do something radical to the image. It does what? Oh, that's because you got some weird brush selected. Click on your drop-down menu here. I don't know what brush you got going, but it's not one that you want. So you need to scroll, click on your drop-down general brushes. Somebody really fucked this machine up. Click on that top one, and now try it. But you need to go back in history to get rid of all that. So go back to the name change, and now try it. It's got to be the brush. Click on the drop-down again. Here, let's try this. Somebody's maybe loaded weird brushes on this. Let me see your mouse real quick. Oh, you got your blending mode set up here to dissolve. Hit Command Z. Sure. All right. And then areas that you want to, say, lighten. So for instance, I want to lighten up this shadow area that's right on the side of her nose to make it a little less creasy. So again, that's a dodging move in there. So I'm going to hit the X key to go to white and then start to work in this area right in here. And you can see you get a very subtle dodge and burn. That wouldn't be something that you would want to. And again, if I click on this, and you'll see. If you hold down your Option key and click on the eyeball next to your dodge and burn layer, it'll actually show it to you. And you can see the very subtle moves that I've made. I've put in a little dark area here, a little lighter area here. The lighter area is making my image lighter. The darker is making it darker. And this middle gray is helping me see where it is, but having no impact on my image at all. Are we good on this? Okay. How would you guys like $3,000 worth of free software?
Yes, sir.
Is anybody in this room using any of the NYX suite of filters? We're going to take a small pause in the recording. I'll be back.